Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Career Life Transitions Change and Transformation presentation this morning. Great to see everyone. It's a cold, wet morning in Perth, as it has been previously, but we certainly enjoyed 5 or 6 days of absolutely beautiful weather. Okay, so we're going to be talking about change today, change and transformation. And I've worked in this field probably for the last 30 years or so. So there's been a few changes that have happened over that time and where the focus has shifted. So this is a 35-minute presentation. We'll certainly, if you have any questions or anything like that, please put them in the chat room and Charlene will pass them through, and I'll have a chance to answer those. We did ask you to present us with some questions prior to that, so we could start to I guess, form this presentation. So we're already answering some of your questions as we go forward. So my name is Peter James. I'm the Director of Career Life Transitions, and as I said previously, I've been working in the area of change management, transformation, organisation development, whatever you want to call it, for nearly 30 years. Prior to that, I worked in senior management in a large manufacturing facility here. So in this session, we are going to be looking at what questions should we be asking about the change, why change fails, what does good change look like, and how do we approach change in a way that is engaging, sustainable, and what some of your next steps might be in terms of rolling out a change program. Now, it's quite complex, there's no doubt. So, I mean, for my change story, really started, as I said, in senior management, $50 million manufacturing facility here in WA. And that organisation, if you talk about organisation development, I think when I joined the company, it was very, very small local manufacturer. As I say, grew to $50 million and we were owned by the Carrier Corporation, but it pretty much started small. The interesting thing about it, there was no HR department, there was no change department, there was no training development department. And as I say, that company grew substantially over that period of time with an enormous amount of change, including going through Australian safety standards and Australian quality standards. In 1995, I started as an organisation development consultant and worked through, I guess, a whole range of what change meant to organisations and how outsiders, consultants internally could support that change. I remember when ADCAR arrived through ProSci, and that would have been, I guess, early 2000, that kind of took the world by storm in terms of really nailing down a process of change, whereas previously was probably more art than anything else. It doesn't take the art away from it, but it certainly provided a framework where a project could have an attachment tool which included change. And the nice thing about that, it very, very much nailed it down to, I guess, 3 key areas there: stakeholder management, training, communications, and then there was a bit of, I guess, other change activities, which may include changing people's job descriptions and things like that. They added on to it. I guess there was an expectation at that time that people's reaction and behaviours could be managed in some way, that the change manager would manage that and magically make people think and work in a different way. There wasn't a lot of expectation from the company or leadership. And I guess that's was very different to my experience going through organisation development in a large organisation where there was 100% expectation on the leader and the manager of an area to manage the training, development, engagement of the people that are reporting to them. As organisations grow, as the structure started to flatten out, as that reporting structure to any individual started to grow significantly, and a lot of pressure put on managers to look after the core process. I think rightly so, a lot of those responsibilities which were extraneous to their core role were taken away. So you weren't necessarily involved in the finance, you weren't involved in the HR processes, you weren't involved in the payroll and things like that. And certainly change seemed to be one of those areas, training, development, change, that started to drift away from the core activities of managers. And I think, and we'll talk about this as we go on, I think that's gone a little bit too far now. But, I've been in change programs where we're running change almost in competition to business as usual. So you're constantly, people trying to drag it back to the way it was while you're trying to create something new with it. And I guess of late, people are now starting to talk about transformation rather than change management. And I guess nicely, going back to what I was saying before, organizations are really starting to recognize that the impact that good leadership can have on successful change. I was talking to a very good friend of mine, and she's very senior in change management and sits, basically works around the world and what have you. And she said some of the large change organizations that specialize in this and are almost getting to the point of guaranteeing results, they won't start any kind of major change process without spending a substantial amount of time with the leadership team. And you've got to look back and have a look at the rise of value of, I guess, CEOs in large organizations. And Jack Walsh comes to mind. I mean, they said any executive that left working for Jack and went and started working for another organization could lift the share price of the new organization by anything up to 20%. And you were talking about a $500, $1 billion company. 20% shift in share price is absolutely enormous. But then you have to ask yourself, what is that individual bringing to that organization? He's certainly not bringing that new way of building widgets or whatever that is. What he's building is an attitude and a way of approaching how the business does business, organization development, if you like, which kind of reinforces that massive impact leaders have on change management, whether it's done well or poorly. And that as a positive example, I mean, I've also seen the opposite happen where actually working for a large organization here in Perth, where a faulty selection of a new CEO has brought that company almost to its knees within 3 months. That person was not able to engage and I guess build a great culture. In fact, when about destroying that great culture, and did that company a lot of damage. So you see these two huge examples of where leaders have made a massive impact one way or the other on what you would say is a change journey. And yet those lessons for a lot of leaders that are now on the front line in that role are falling on deaf ears. So just going back, and I mused over this a little bit of recent times about what is it between organisation development, change management, and this new term of transformation. So I guess organisation development is really everything that goes together to build the organisation and grow that organisation. And it's not just about the people. Organisation development in its purest term is everything: the metrics, the strategy, the structure, the assets, the technology, all of those things that go together, which I'm trying to build as I build my organisation in a balanced way so nothing falls off. It's a science-backed field based in a range of activities there that support the growth of the organisation. It's long been understood by organisation developments that the difference between an organisation that has aligned its assets and technology and its people is likely to produce anything up to 20-25% better return on investment than an organisation that hasn't achieved that alignment. When we talk about change management, and the term has been around, and I guess the change management has started to get itself a bit of a bad reputation as being kind of the police in the organisation. They're trying to change the way it's always been that we enjoyed working. And but it's that systematic approach where I'm trying to transition the organisation from one point to another, especially around the people side of it. But it must include that transition of the technology and what have you. Now, I guess there is two big views on especially people and organisations as to whether it is if everyone feels great about being in an organisation, that we get an increase and an improvement in productivity, or whether if we build a great organization by design, then that flows through to the people. I guess I've always been of the view that you need to build the framework of which people operate in to achieve results. And certainly scientific approach to organization development reinforces that view, that building a framework for where people know how to behave, how to act, how to interact, that the systems are built to support that in a very, very designed way, will align people to that. Now, if they feel great about being at work, yes, that's a benefit, and certainly a benefit to the individual, but just going in and doing some team building and those kind of activities without it having some kind of purpose at the end of it, research shows that doesn't impact on the bottom line of the growth of the organization. So we've kind of got a little bit frightened with this whole thing around change management and started to talk about transformation, which, in its definition form is completely change the appearance or character of something or someone, especially so that thing or person is improved. So it's kind of quite a large leap in terms of a large organization to say that you are completely changing the appearance. But change, I guess, you're either doing change as part of any aspect of organizational development, but I mean, most of our experience around change management is going in and changing processes, policies, procedures, whatever. And let's face it, I mean, the growth of change management is closely aligned to the rollout of IT systems, because that's where you have a completely different way of doing business, where whole areas are changed and areas are being made redundant. I mean, I certainly remember when I started working in an office, we didn't have a computer, so we had a typing pool. No one sent out their own communications. We didn't have emails, things like that. So there was a team of people who looked after that, but IT has rolled that in, and now I don't know anybody that has a typing pool. I don't know anybody that doesn't type their own letters anymore. It's kind of an interesting transition. And we've made that transition willingly with the interaction of information technology. So some of the key questions you want to ask yourself before you move into change is, what outcome do I want from this? And I know it seems like a little bit of a strange question, but I mean, the number of times I've heard someone say, well, no, we need to have a change in the culture of this organization. Okay, a change of culture to what? Well, we want everyone to have a better attitude. Okay, for what end? Because I mean, the culture of the organisation should align with the marketplace in which that organisation is operating in. Now, and also adding in the broader requirements of that organisation, of the community and the expectations. So if they have a highly regulated organisation, you need a culture that aligns with that regulation while at the same time meeting the needs of its customer base. If you've got a very creative environment you're operating in, like Uber or something like that, where they're really groundbreaking, you have a culture that has that view, whether it's Google or whatever. So, I mean, just to sort of say, well, we need to change the culture here, because I guess a lot of organizations aren't talking about starting from a baseline. What they're saying is, well, we don't like the culture around here. There isn't engagement. People aren't willingly providing the effort, this discretionary effort to make the wheels continue to turn. So what we want is people to have a different attitude when they come to work. Okay, well, to me, that's kind of bringing it up to a baseline. But if you're going to go that way, why not really describe what it is? And it goes into assets and technology. I mean, I've seen organizations that go out and just buy the greatest and latest technology to roll in with absolutely no benefit whatsoever to the organization. In fact, probably detrimental to the organization. I've seen small organizations buy massive IT programs and applications so they can appear to be the big players, but in actual fact, all it does is create an enormous amount of stress in the business and doesn't provide any benefit. And I guess it was interesting when benefits realization, which I worked a part of, a team that worked in that area there, we found the benefits realization started to crack, and I don't hear that much about it anymore, which is an interesting one. Started to crack as soon as we put the responsibility for that change back on to the leaders. So we said as a change team, training team, engagement team, we'll do this. Leaders, this is what we expect you to do. And that's where the crack started to form. And I guess that was telling in itself. Next question, what has to be different to change those outcomes? So are we changing culture for the sake of changing culture? Or are we rolling these kind of applications in? Are we creating a new bottleneck, or are we looking at what are the constraints through the whole process? Are we just going in and building a bigger warehouse when the constraint is the amount of product that's going into the warehouse, for example? I mean, sitting back and spending a little bit of time thinking about constraint theory is quite interesting, and your target for change should be the removal of those constraints, not change it for change's sake or to keep up with technology if the rest of the process isn't, the organizational development process isn't aligned with that. Third question is, how complex is the change? Are we talking about a massive gap here, or are we talking about a minor gap? I mean, sometimes when change rolls in there, IT people are clever with their applications. They can actually even produce a front end that is not different to what the previous front end looked like. Therefore, people's interaction with it is quite small, all the way through to we're completely changing the way we do business here. How much time do you have to make this change? And I guess that's something else on where you really need to sort of sit back and say, all right, what's happening in the marketplace? And things are moving so quickly at the moment. How much time do I have to do this? I mean, traditionally they talk about organizations, if you're looking at a cultural change of 2 to 3 years, but as I say, I can tell you I've seen a cultural change to the negative happen within 3 months. So once again, it goes a lot to the leader and how much effort you want to actually put in to make that change happen, because it does require effort. And certainly a lot of the work I was doing in change almost was remedial work. We'd started off this process, we'd rolled it out, no one was getting on board. Can you come in and get everyone online with our new IT system, or our new process, or our new policies? And you ended up kind of mopping up something that probably would have been a lot cheaper to do at the front end. But as I say, in a lot of cases, that whole change component did not represent a large percentage of whatever the budget was for the bigger initiative for change. How much productivity are you prepared to sacrifice? What is your budget for the change? As I said before, spending a little bit up front will change you save you a lot at the end, but we go into these processes not thinking a lot about that. And do I have real intangible support from the top? And my experience in change, in a lot of cases, as I say, the responsibility for that being that way is almost lumped into the middle of the organization, not into the executive. And when you have an executive team come together, there's either a couple of things going on. One is that executive team has quite a period of time to decide whether they like or don't like the change, and have this short expectation of engagement by their staff, even though they weren't going to change in a short amount of time. Or that you have competition within the senior team, where it's not actually a team. Now, as FIFA would say, you have a group of people competing for scarce resources. And in that competition for scarce resources, you don't have a unified approach to whatever that change might be, which means that the leadership team in its own way is eroding the capability and creating silos in the business. When that happens, then that's when you lead to change failures and spectacular change failures. So these are typical changes in the last 3 years. As I say, CV analysis is the over 305 organisations. 78% culture changes, interesting. 69% restructures, 61% market expansions, 52% leadership transitions, 29% mergers and acquisitions. So it's kind of interesting. We used to talk about 5 and 10 year plans, and now we're looking at things and saying, okay, we're starting to see the impact that people have on the organisation. I mean, being in change the time I always had a view going back 15, 20 years ago that a lot of West Australian organisations especially never really appreciated the enormous strategic benefit that a highly engaged workforce added to added to the business in terms of productivity and bottom line. And I think that reflection on cultural change is quite interesting from that graph. Now you add COVID into that mix, you've got people working from home, and there's lots of different things going on. There's a whole new set of challenges coming in. I mean, I'm talking to organisations now that are saying, all my staff work from home. How do I manage the culture under those circumstances? They're rarely coming into the office. And culture, let's face it, is what you see happening around. It's the way things are done around here. And culture isn't something I can tell you to be unless it has some reward system or some negative consequences to not complying with that. And if you're not in contact with people, people are not seeing the way things are done. So they'll do things the way they do best. And I'm not saying people are malicious, but we have a full range of approaches to our life in terms of our values. And unless we are aligning them in some way, then the culture will be what the culture is. And trying to change that, okay, that becomes a more and more complex problem. So the average organisation has undergone up to 5 change initiatives in the last 3 years, which means that we're talking about change, and they're always talking about, people being over it. We've had enough of change around the place. 73% of organisations expect a major organisational change in the next 3 years. Only 1 in 3 organisational changes initially fully meet the defined goals. And I guess that is the bottom line. That track record of success in terms of any kind of change is not strong. So why is change unsuccessful? Well, I mean, there's 3 reasons I put up there. We fail to realise the full complexity of the change and the unique individual dynamic that is part of that change dynamic. We miss the imperative to support employees' unique needs as they occur inside the change experience itself. And when management or leadership fail to recognise the impact they or it can have on change. And I guess I've now really thought about the difference between management and leadership as being the difference between management is about processes, policies, procedures, and compliance around the organisation. Leadership is about developing a relationship. And when you have organisations where you have a long-term leadership group, they're more likely to be able to effectively manage the culture in the organisation and therefore its ability to change than when we're rotating people in and out of the senior management team. But it's also a lot of leaders or people at the top of organisations look at change as a management process which can be dictated, can be managed in some way, whereas leadership and leaders start to recognise that, well, there is a unique dynamic where we need to build a relationship with employees to get the best out of them. And the best out of them is that discretionary effort that people put in. If you don't have discretionary effort, then you really bring an organisation down, because that is someone going that little extra mile to make things work. To my view, discretionary effort is the oil in an organisation. And organisations that don't have discretionary effort usually are much more cumbersome. They need to employ much more people to deliver the same results. So we talked about the integral model, which is Ken Wilber's model, and he really talked about, well, you have basically the systems and the people, and the collective, the individuals, how we do things and how we think about things. And I guess on the right-hand side there, we're quite well versed at managing that, because it's very, very tangible. I can see what it is. I can see results from it. I can see where I can interact with it. So it's very, very easy to manage on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side is where leadership starts to come in. Now, we can impact both sides of it. I mean, we can put our policies and procedures and plans and strategic plans and business plans in there to look at the right-hand side of that model. But at the same time, Why would you embark on any kind of cultural change if you haven't decided what you want that cultural values change to be? What do you want that to look like? Because an inattention on the left-hand side has meant that people have been allowed to do the best they can with what they have. And that doesn't always end up with the end result you're looking for. You can't say, I don't want to play this game. You can't say, I don't want to have the culture and the values and what have you. Any kind of interaction you have with people, once you get a group of people, they will norm in a certain set of behaviours. Now, you can define those or you can let them grow by themselves. If you let them grow by themselves, then you're kind of hoping that you're going to get the shared values that you wanted to instill there. And a lot of businesses are letting that develop. And when it gets out of control, that's what I'm saying, where it starts to drop below that baseline, where now I'm having to put a lot more effort into actually just bringing it back to an even keel where you've got a positive culture, and then design it to the culture that meets the needs of the marketplace you're going into and your customer base. So there's the fear of attachment that people do relate to things they're familiar and secure with, that there is something that they're operating around that makes them feel safe at work. And that can be anything from a software system to a manager, a team, a location. I mean, you know, I've seen relationships fail where someone joins the organisation and uses someone else's cup and they don't talk to each other for a couple of years. There is all that. I develop an attachment to a certain environment, and when there is loss, then that organisation can become unstable. So it is important to, when you're moving through change and considering the individual aspect of this or the people aspect of this, that you do recognise that people have attachments moving forward. They have attachments to the way things were, and the best way to move them forward is to involve them. You know, I mean, we're all going through change. We can't look back on any of our lives and say we haven't had some significant change in that period of time. And that usually is a change that hasn't always been comfortable, but we have been involved in it. And I guess that's a bottom line. People are more comfortable with change where they're engaged in it rather than, and that's through the relationship of leadership rather than we're telling you what it is, which is the management, I guess. So motivational theory, and I know I won't spend a lot of time on this, I am aware of the time, is, you know, Daniel Pink talks about, well, if I want to engage people, I need to provide them with autonomy, mastery, and purpose. If we don't do change well, we damage all three of those. If we talk about David Rock's SCARF model, once again, these are the things that impact on the individual. They're looking for one or multiple of these things in their workplace in terms of status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, which is your team, and fairness. And when these changes, I guess, managed without the relationship and leadership, then it provides the opportunity for any of these not to be met. If there's a restructure, my status is challenged. If you're telling me what the change is without involving me in it, then I'm concerned about certainty moving forward. If this is all happening without my input, then my autonomy is being challenged. If you're breaking up my team, then my relatedness can be challenged. And if I see something happening that I don't think is fair, this group is getting that, I'm not getting it, this person gets that, then my impact on my fairness is triggered. So therefore, how do we move people from one mindset to another without destabilizing the business? And that's, we talk about change management, but we should never move change management away from the primary purpose of the business, which is to deliver a service. Now, whether that's a not-for-profit or for-profit or a government area providing services in some way, shape or form, remember that the change and the people have a purpose in the broader organization. We are not doing this just for the sake of that. We are looking at stabilizing and aligning people's mindsets with the growth of the business as we change the entire development of it. And that includes assets in technology and all those type of things moving forward. So it has a purpose, therefore it has to have alignment. So what does good change look like? Now, I love this formula. This is Danny Miller. If you haven't read Danny Miller, then I would really suggest you get a copy of her book. But I use this formula for just about everything, even putting together case studies up, case studies down, organizations. So really what it says is I need to determine what the level of resistance to any change is here. Once I understand what that level of resistance is, I need to go back and have a very, very clear vision. And the amount of effort you put in the back end here really is dependent on the amount of resistance you're likely to encounter moving forward. I need a great vision. I need to spend some time reminding people or pointing out to people as to why it needs to be different. And I think in certainly a lot of change activities I've seen around the place, not enough effort is put into that dissatisfaction model. Now, any good salesman will tell you that the steps to sales conversion is that walk through heaven. Here is how everything is going to be wonderful when you buy the product, and a walk through hell. This is how poor it's going to be when you don't buy the product, and that is part of the formula for change. People are much more pliable if they completely understand the broader context as to why things can't continue the way they've been, rather than being told, even though it may seem obvious to the executive that it can't go on this way. It's not always obvious to the people that you're expecting to be engaged in the change process. And then obviously the next part of it, have a plan, be clear as to what your first steps are. And as I said to you, depending on the level of resistance, is really how much effort you put into the V, D, and P component of that change formula. Symptoms of change, we'll send you out a copy of this. I'm just aware of the time in 9:34, so we won't go for much longer. I'll send this out, but I mean, you can see down the right-hand side there in terms of intervention strategy for symptoms of change really revolve around engagement, support, leadership, initiatives, coaching, training, development. And it's that leadership matters. Where is your leadership team coming from? As I said before, if your leadership team is not on board, if they're not 100% on board, and it's not just about I agree with the change, it really needs to be 100% on board in terms of I behave, I act, I see, I reward, I censure, in a way that aligns where you want the current, the future state to be. Because, I mean, I worked with a fellow years and years ago, and his favorite saying was, what interests my boss fascinates me. Now, leaders do need to step up and recognize they have a massive impact on how people see things. And if a leader poo-poos a change or turns their back on some aspect of that, the people who see that are now recognizing their acknowledgement they're not on board with the change. And if the leader's not on board with the change, why would I put myself through that pain? So just quickly, I mean, they're the 5 functions of the team. I'm just going to focus on that bottom bit, leadership, that absence of trust. If I have a fear of vulnerability, if I don't have a leadership team that is picking up and building that level of trust, and everything on top of that pyramid starts to erode. If I'm going through a huge change, then for the leadership, I must have an enormous amount of trust in the leadership and management of the organization to get on board with that. If I don't feel that level of trust, then everything starts to topple above that bottom baseline of the pyramid. How do we achieve it? Well, as I said right at the beginning, what is your change focus? And there's the finance side of it, the assets, the technology, business process. They're all the components of organizational development. And these are the things that you need to be bringing along in parallel. You can't be at number 1 in your finances and trying to build a culture that sits at number 5, or putting in processes at number 5 when your people profiles are sitting at 2. It just doesn't work. So you're constantly looking at the technology of the organization and aligning the behaviors, because they're the 2 key components of that. A management process in terms of leadership is a massive component of that. So change journey conclusion, change can't be outsourced in a company. It can't even be outsourced to the change team or HR. We're all on this together. I sometimes think that leaders or managers of organizations handball change to HR or the change team or organization development. And sometimes the change team and HR take that responsibility on and accept that that's the way it is. But facts of the matter are, the people who you want to impact by this are the ones that are reporting to the managers and supervisors and are aligned to the core process. So it needs to be a team effort. Focus effort on developing managers, supervisors, and leaders. I can't stress that enough. They are the ones that align the culture, they align the values of the people in the organisation. People can come in with their own set of values, but they'll soon figure out if they can see, feel, and hear the way things are done around here, they will fit in. And if they don't, then it becomes a different conversation. HR can support this through employment selection, development and training, ongoing assessment. If you're looking to develop your culture, then you need to be looking at people who are coming in already with that view and culture and understanding of your future direction of where you want to go. Employ and promote people for their ability to engage staff and demonstrate agility and flexibility is a key part of it as well. I mean, moving someone into a senior manager role who doesn't have leadership skills, or at least being developed and coached in leadership skills, you're putting yourself in a dangerous situation, both for them, for the team, and for the broader organisation. Change is going to continue, so it needs to move from that activity to a cultural norm where the organisation is now, we are a flexible, agile organisation that's moving forward. It wasn't change is something we're doing that's attached to this component of it or that component of it. And I think that view is where change fatigue started to come in. But I mean, change is just the way we do things around here. That's part of a cultural acceptance, which you can establish as a leader in the organisation. Change has evolved from being a nice to have to an operational and strategic imperative. Okay, summary. Know where you're heading and why. All change is personal. Understand this for people, and it's about building engagement and resilience in your team. Change isn't always that choice. There's so many disruptors and whatever coming in here that you may be forced to move quite quickly. At the heart of every organisational change is the fact that people need to think and do things differently, and leadership will drive that outcome. Change takes energy and costs money. It costs a lot less up front and a lot more down the track. To recover from a failed change program is much, much more expensive than doing it right the first time. You can't run an organisation transformational business as usual. You do need to put the effort into change. And the biggest contributor to success and transformation is not the process, but the mindset. I saw a nice cartoon the other day, and I'd certainly experienced it, where someone was saying, you know, the change process starts once the new IT system goes in, or once, because it's the people that make the change or make that new process work. If people resist doing that, then the best IT system in the world, the best process in the world, will add no value to your business. Focus on developing the people that will have the biggest impact on mindset. So where you have those people who are embracing, there's always a 10-15% of that bell curve that are looking for those opportunities to grow and change. And that's where you want to focus your effort, not trying to change the bottom end 15% that don't want to change. Okay, I think we are done and just about on time, 9:40. I don't know, Charlene, do we have any questions that?
Yeah, sorry, Peter. We do have one question here, which is, Peter, do you think you could share a case study of the Cotto model or any other change steps model in practice?
I mean, it really is a moving feast in terms of change models, because I mean, I guess as soon as you put a change model in place, then you're, you know, I guess adding a process to an emotional interaction.
So if you go back and have a look at getting the right people on the bus, and Jim Collins, or whether you're talking about, I mean, I remember going and listening to the Cotter going back in the 90s, I think, at UWA. He came out and presented there. And it sounds fantastic. And I guess there's probably more written about change and change models and what have you around the place. But the change model that I think is probably the best one is still the Danny Miller model. And that really looks at getting a leadership all squared away and taking people through that change journey and designing the aspects of it moving forward, and working with people rather than trying to go in and say, this is a model we're going to impose on the team. Now, it really means that you need to separate out some people specifically to work on change. So there are people that design the change, people that are communicating the change, and people that engage in the activities around what happens in change as a separate part of the business, not just expecting the people that are already working in the business to adopt that. So I would encourage, that's where I see it has worked the best, where we need to go in and set up change as a specific activity that aligns, not something we're just expecting the leaders and managers to do, which are already stressed at that time. But I mean, there are a number of case studies where that worked well. If you want to send whoever asked that question, we can certainly send some more information out.
Sorry, Pete, I've also just got another one here from Sandra, and she was just wondering if you have had any experience with empathy mapping.
Empathy mapping. That's an interesting one. I personally haven't had any experience with empathy mapping. No, I'm not quite sure where it would fit in. So I'm going to have to look that one up for you. I'm sorry, I haven't heard about empathy mapping. I guess I have heard of discretionary effort mapping and engagement, but not empathy. So let me look that one up, Sandra. Okay, we got anything else, Charlene?
Sorry, Sandra's just explained it is where you map out what people might feel, see, hear in terms of the change in regards to empathy mapping.
Okay, I guess the ADCAR models from ProSci try to do that. So if you're looking at mapping your resistance to change in the organisation, then certainly the ProSci model has been quite successful in the ADCAR approach to that.
Was there any questions left remaining for Peter? Sorry, I do have one. Hi, Peter. My entity, I'm responsible for the change journey, just got separated from its ex-joint venture. It was successfully disinvestment, but it was an independent entity. Now the transition team is looking to scale back up again to make a mark on the market. What's your suggestion on change ramp and prerequisites? How do you prepare the team for acceleration?
Maybe, I mean, given the time, maybe can we take...
Maybe if we have a chat with them afterwards.
I'll give that individual a call a little bit later on. We can have a chat about that.
Yeah, not a problem.
A little bit of a big one, yeah. All right, on that note, thank you very much for joining us. I hope we've certainly added some value. Peter James is my name from Career Life Transitions. If we can support you in any way or you want to have a conversation, please give us a call. And thank you very much for your time this morning. We have recorded this and we'll also be sending out a copy of the slide pack and available for any other questions you have. So many thanks for everyone for joining us and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.